Hi guys. So seeing as a lot of us are stuck at home and a number of us are trying to do exercise while we're at home, I want to talk to you about stretching, or particularly effective stretching. Something which you can do where you get a good response from the body, which ideally gives you a positive change. Now, generally speaking, there are two types of stretching. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief science background, and then we'll go over some basic stretches and a couple of variations on them that you can use ideally in the comfort of your own home. So you've got maintenance and developmental stretching. Now, developmental is usually used post-injury and for changing your range of movement. It's done over a long period of time because it takes time to implement those changes. Maintenance stretching is more for performance and keeping your optimal range of movement. And this is the kind of stuff we do when we're training, when we're exercising, at practice, when you go to the gym, anything like that. This is the stuff you want to do before and after exercise. The idea of a stretch is you have to hold it for a certain amount of time for it to be effective, and you have to do a certain number of repetitions to get the best from it. Now, one of the things which always affects this is the time that you've got. So it's basically looking at what's applicable and what's ideal. Now, in an ideal world, you're going to do your stretches for 15 to 20 seconds, and you're going to do them 3 times. Now, you can't do that if you go to an exercise class or you go to the gym a lot of the time because you're on a time scale. But you can do a little bit beforehand. You can do some yourself at home, you can do some before you go, if you turn up early to your classes, anything like that. A little bit of extra stretching really can help. The science behind it is basically it takes a bit of time for your body to recognize the fact that there's a stretch, and then for your body to respond to that stretch and allow the muscle to lengthen and move a little bit further. I won't go too much into the science behind it because I imagine most of you won't be too interested in terms of it, but you need to give it that sort of amount of time. Anything less than 10 seconds, the muscle doesn't respond. So you need to try and hold it for a length of time. So for a lot of the audience looking at this will be doing kendo. Normally we do a count of 8. Usually when we're counting that, it doesn't actually last long enough to be 15 to 20 seconds because you're counting quicker than a second. So normally doing 3 sets of 8 is enough, but ideally then you do that 3 times. We don't usually have enough time to do that. So doing something beforehand or something at home just to kind of help maintain, hence the maintenance stretching, that range of movement really can help and try and reduce the onset of injuries or the risk of injuries at all. So a lot of the work we're going to do in terms of stretching, in terms of exercise, and over the last number of years, there's been a big focus on what's called the posterior chain. So standing in an anatomical position here, your posterior chain is anything behind you. So anything of me facing the wall here. So everything down the back of the legs, back of the arms, back of the head and neck, and through the back of the shoulders. Anterior chain, so your front, is anything facing towards the camera that you guys are looking at from there. Most of the time, everyday people are usually tight through the anterior chain and weak on their posterior chain. So what this tends to cause is sort of rounded shoulder position, and that can lead then to a lot of it being sort of what we call locked in a long position in terms of the profession. This can lead to things like a lot of tightness through the neck, through the shoulders, headaches, stuff like that. So we're going to go over a number of stretches for that posterior chain and a couple for the anterior chain. But ideally, when you're doing your exercising, stuff like that, what you want to try and work on is a little bit more sort of conditioning or toning of the posterior chain so that the anterior chain can start to relax and open and release a little bit more. So, talking about stretches, one of the most basic ones we all know, stretching your calf. Now, if I say to most people stretch your calf, this is the sort of position they go into either using a wall or just stood as so. The big important things here, if I turn to face the front this way, is that back foot and the direction it faces. A lot of people will do this stretch with a foot in this kind of position. This doesn't hit the calf. You need to make sure that big toe is almost pointing a little bit inwards. Yeah, this sort of feeling. Again, for those doing kendo, it's more about the feeling of your kamae, trying to get that feeling of almost bringing the hip in slightly. This feeling invariably ends up with you actually being straight. So from that kind of position, it should almost feel like you're pointing that way. And then you'll normally end up into a more of a straight position. From there then, have the feeling of pushing your hips forward slightly and then bending your front knee. What you do with your hands doesn't matter. You can do a different stretch as well at the same time if you want. You can push against the wall to get a little bit more resistance in terms of being able to push further back into the stretch. But this should stretch now much more into this region, into the calf. From there, that's your basic calf stretch. A variation of it, if I go from the side position, bring the foot a little bit closer, keep the heel flat, and then bend the knee and drop your bum down. This is aiming to hit more towards the Achilles and lower down into the muscle. And again, it's not leaning back, straightening that leg. It's from that position, dropping over that center line, over that center of gravity. That allows you to stretch lower down into the muscle. Again, for most of you guys doing kendo, that's going to be an area where you tend to get a lot of tightness through the Achilles and through that region. That's just a basic variation of it. So that's your calf and Achilles stretch. Then you've got your hamstrings. Now, a lot of people tend to do this stretch, but you can go through the motions without really stretching the muscle very much. For me, I tend to go into a much wider base here and drop down that way, because I can drop my hips towards my back leg and I can lean forwards a little bit over that front leg. That's the important bit. So even if you do it from that higher position here, you need to get your hips down and then lean forwards. From here, with the hips quite high, even if I lean forward, you can notice how far I can drop my body. Whereas if I drop the hips down first, I can't actually move much further. That puts a much stronger stretch into the hamstring. So usually I do it with a slightly wider base. For those of you that can, if you don't have bad knees, anything like that, drop the weight over that leg, turn the foot, and then drop your hips down, almost like you're trying to sit on your back heel. That position allows you to bring the toes back and lean forward over that leg. That'll give you a much deeper stretch into the hamstring here. Now, a variation on that, which hits slightly more towards the adductors, again, same sort of position, but from that higher position where normally you bring that toe up, keep the foot flat, and then bend the knee just a little bit. So you're talking that much of an angle, not much. And then drop your hips again down, like you're trying to drop your hips to that back foot. From there, as you then lean forward, you should feel this a little bit more towards the upper part of the hamstring and a little bit towards the inside of the leg, towards the adductors. That will give you a good stretch again on an area when you're trying to push the body forwards and drive forwards this way. Now, glute stretches. This is one of the big ones that people tend to neglect. Now, this can affect tight hamstrings. This can affect a lot of lower back pain. So if you're getting that feeling of a lot of tightness through your lower back, whether it's after exercise, when you wake up in the morning, anything like that, a basic glute stretch really can help. Now, this one's particularly good if you've got a seat, because you can just sit down and do it, but if you can, or if you need to, sat on the floor like so, straighten the one leg, pop that over, and then basically turn your body almost like you're trying to get this knee and this shoulder to touch. So you're going to try and get those as close together as you can. And you're using this arm just to push that knee across. And you should feel that then just into the glutes here. Yeah? This is just a nice basic glute stretch. Again, same sort of thing from there, and just turning the body as much as I can. To apply any sort of stretch, the idea is getting one end of the muscle to pull away from the other end. So if you know your anatomy and where the position of the muscle is, you can kind of work along that basic idea. Whenever you stretch, you want the feeling of a stretch, not a sharp pain. If you're getting a sharp pain, stop. Simple as that, yeah? But you need to have the feeling that the stretch is actually hitting the muscle and working the muscle that you're trying to stretch. Otherwise, it's not doing the job you need it to, okay? Now, I get a lot of questions about lower back stretching. It's not an area that's easy to stretch. So we're not going to go over it much in this one, because again, you can work a lot of it by stretching out through the glutes. The reason why it's not easy to stretch the lower back is because it's a load-bearing area. It's not an area designed to have a large range of movement, and there aren't many muscles that cross over the region which allow you to stretch it that way. So stretching the glutes, which attach into that lower back, then tend to help or have a fascial overlay with it. That allows it to kind of release a lot of the tension and stress and restriction going through that area, okay? The other ones I want to give you a basic run over today of your shoulder and neck sort of stretches and exercises. Most people do this sort of stretch. Personally, I don't find much benefit from this stretch. If you can get a stretch around the back here or around the deltoid here, fine, keep doing that stretch. I find usually ones where I'm pushing the body forward this way and pushing the spine back tend to give me a much stronger stretch around that region of the rhomboids between the shoulder blade and the spine. I find that much more effective, but again, with these regions, because the shoulder has a high range of movement, it is a little bit more individual in terms of the stretches that will work best for you, yeah? So, other common ones you tend to get. The sort of tricep stretch where you pull this way, the one where you reach across that way, or where you reach over and bring the other arm up the back. Again, all of them are applicable as long as they're stretching the area you feel, but you need to make sure they're hitting the right area. So if I'm trying to stretch my tricep here, one of the important things that people tend to do is they kind of lean this way. And there's nothing wrong with that, but before you lean, you need to try and make sure that you're pushing the elbow upwards and then back a little bit without leaning. Because if you lean, you can get almost a false sense of that arm position. You can see from here, it's actually pointing that way, rather than here, and then increasing the stretch with this hand. Then if I lean, I can start to add to it and stretch a little bit more down that lateral side, yeah? So when you do the stretches, get into your stretch position before you move any other part. That will give you a better stretch, okay? Again, same sort of thing with this one I said earlier, the idea of reaching the arm forward, keeping the chest stable. From there, grab the wrist and push a little bit further forward. So from the side, you can see from there, protract the shoulder, take hold and push. And from there, I can feel a much stronger stretch but in that region between the shoulder blade and the spine. So again, it's trying to get that feeling of the stretch through the right areas. And the same thing when you do these kind of stretches, again, push this arm down, drop the head to the side. You should feel this stretch along the side of the neck, yeah? All of these stretches, like I said earlier, you shouldn't feel any sharp pain. It should be the feeling of pulling one end of the muscle away from the other, a stretching feeling. It should almost be what a lot of people, a lot of my patients describe as a good pain, this kind of sensation, okay? So with that feeling, just be careful that you don't go into it quickly. Stretching something should not be done quickly. Yeah, and this is one of the big things with it. You want to build into that feeling of trying to increase that range of movement. So from here, this is one of the reasons why we do it 3 times and hold it for a 15 to 20 second period. From here, I can feel that stretch into the side of my neck and top of my shoulder. I would hold that then for 15 or 20 seconds. From there, after about 10 seconds, it should feel a little bit easier. Usually then, hold it for that next 5 to 10, depending on how tight it is. Come out of it, relax if you want, do the other side. And then the next time you go into the stretch, you should find you can go a little bit further before you get to the same amount of sensation of that stretch in that area. This is what we're looking at, is trying to get that ideal or full range of movement by getting that little bit of a stretch through each of those muscles, okay? So, in terms of those, they're all the basic stretches you should ideally know already, maybe a couple of small variations on them. But the main thing I want to get to you guys is the idea of effective stretching. It's very easy to go through stretches and not actually get much improvement from them. So it's really important to try and maximize the positive output from the effort that you're putting into a stretch. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. It's a waste of your time, yeah? It's the same thing when you do any exercise, training. For the kendo people watching this, that keiko, when you go in and you do your practice, you can do 1,000 suburi, but it's useless if you're not looking at improving something. And again, if you look at the Kendo Star videos, the emails from the BKA, a lot of what the sensei and the teachers are talking about is making use of the repetition. If you're not making use of it, it's the same thing as turning up to practice and not really bothering. Yeah, same idea. You won't gain from it. And the same thing when you do your stretches. They are there for a reason. Reduce the risk of injury, reduce the risk of, I suppose, pain after the session in terms of overworking that way. Now, obviously, hard practice, you will get some discomforts, some muscle ache afterwards, but the idea of stretching is to reduce it, to make the next day a little bit more bearable, a little bit more manageable, yeah? And ideally then, to keep a range of movement that doesn't just get worse and worse and worse and worse week on week, month on month, so that by the end of 2 years' time, you can hardly move, yeah? So trying to keep the soft tissue moving is really, really important. So 3 repetitions of 15 to 20 seconds. This is the important bit. This is the gold standard of stretching. If you can get this when you're at home, when you're doing your exercises, all the rest of it, it really, really will help. And you'll actually find that you can move a little bit easier when you're doing your exercises, your weight training, your suburi, anything at all. It just helps to keep the body moving that little bit more, that little bit better. Yeah, it's optimizing what you're putting the body through rather than just going through the motions. Okay, so like I said, 3 times, 15 to 20 seconds. If you've got the time, you can do more repetitions, but that's your kind of ideal minimum that you want to try and get through. If you go to an exercise class when all this social isolation stuff is over, or isolation stuff is over, when you can get to a class or you go to a practice, anything like that, then if it's not part of the practice or the class that you're doing, do some beforehand, especially on the areas where you feel any of that tightness, that restriction. Try and get that feeling of getting those muscles to work and move, so then you don't start getting any build-up of pain, discomfort or problems. Okay, if you have any questions, you can drop me an email at enquiries@sportsmassagecardiff.net. So that's enquiries with an E, so enquiries@sportsmassagecardiff.net. Otherwise, drop me a message and I'll hopefully be able to let you know anything you need to know. Cheers.